he used to say that no academic session should last longer than an hour and a half, because human attention has a way of fading out after 45 or 50 minutes. So, by that criterion, since the morning we have such oodles of wisdom that already many of you might be thinking overburdened. And I don't think that I should add to your agony by my own random observations that might take more than a couple of minutes. But I will take only minimum number of words to say what I want to say after having listened to an entire survey of the teaching community and teaching fraternity in India, at least of philosophers, on last 100 years or so. I will not repeat anything that Professor Chandel has already so marvelously reviewed about the Indian traditions and Indian concepts and so on. I forget Indian concepts too easily. So, I would say something on entirely a different subject. And that very different subject is very different. It is philosophy as a quest for necessary truth. Philosophy as a quest for necessary truth in science. So, what is the relationship of the nature of philosophical relation with science? That is all a few observations I will make. How philosophy is concerned with science. Now, before I say anything, let me make it clear that all quest in knowledge is for certainty, and certainty is one of the things most difficult to get. The only certainty that I know of generally is that when there are two fingers, and there are two fingers, well, if you count them by some method, they will be four. So, the only necessity is this, that if all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates will be a mortal. So, either there is a deductive reason or there is an inductive reason. Now, as far as inductive reasons are concerned, philosophers of science, such distinguished names as Karl Popper, he has said that we can only have testability, we never have confirmation. There is no possibility of confirmation, there are only testability of hypotheses. So, as far as necessary truth is concerned, as Plato said, that only geometry is the necessary truth. When we have got a certain set of axioms, we have certain definitions, and there are series of rules of reduction. If you apply those axioms and then you start with those definitions, you can develop theorems. And this is all that mathematics has been doing all the time, whether it is algebra or differential calculus or any other method, or tensor calculus, which is required for relativity and extremes. So, one of the most surprising things that I want to emphasize to you is we must try to ask this question to ourselves, that how it is that we small persons with so many little and so many weaknesses, already I am fairly weak, my knees don't work, my eyes are short, but still we human beings are capable of creating numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and all the distances and all the relationships in the properties and material conditions can be represented by combinations of these very letters. So this is one of the great marvels of human intelligence, that by combining and recombining numbers, we can represent all the quantities in terms of which nature is understood, analyzed, and experimented on, and confirmed, and predicted, and reconfirmed, and retested. So this is one of the great ones. And still further, you take up any language, it may have 26 letters, it may have 32 letters, it may have 27 in Greek, alpha to omega, or any French or German, or any, it makes no difference. Chomsky says that all languages are capable of representing all representations in the universe. So, how come this, that languages are not given by God? I mean, I am not one of those who believe in the peculiar Indian tradition of thinking that God, that language is a product of God's gift, all those things. I will say language is a product, an instrument produced by human minds with a limited sense, but all those symbols, I mean, why only this? Just think of this, that there can be a language, there is a center, there is cross section, 1, 2, 3. There are 3 dimensions, and out of these 3 dimensions, all the numbers can represent everything that happens to happen in the universe. Any part of the universe is there, could be represented from this corner. I mean, this end the length, breadth and the height. Out of this you can represent by various numbers all moments and all times and time. So in time, starting from this, we can represent events that have happened before this event or that will happen. So this ability to develop frameworks with the help of our own conceptualizations. So these powers of conceptualizations are the most important things. There are numbers and there are words. So how it is, now this is one of the marvels. Words can, total number of words which are possible. If we were, even the biggest computers will not be, because there can be combination and mathematically permutation and combination, whether 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 or 1 and 27 are rearrangement, not only combination but also permutations that you can start with A or Z. So in that way, how many words or how many concepts, assuming that every word does not mean necessarily something, but possibilities of expressing newer meanings is always there, inherent and involved in the possibility of using the tools of letters. Letters in different combinations will make words, and words in different combinations will make judgments, and judgments in their various combinations will make various discourses. So human beings are always producing discourses. Having said this, let me finish this small representation by quoting a young Chinese scholar who came to visit to Cambridge in beginning of 20th century under Professor G. Moore at Cambridge. He attended his lectures, and you know Professor G. Moore was very austere person, and he used to insist on using words rather firmly and clearly, and he go on saying, I don't think that exactly you mean that, you are meaning. So that was the kind of tradition that we had at Cambridge University. So that gentleman, Chinese, he has come all the way from the east to come at the Cambridge University. He was one of the brightest students, obviously from China. He said that when I came to Cambridge, I thought that we will be studying something about the nature of matter, nature of particles, nature of universe, nature of morality, nature of values, nature of God, and so on. We have nothing. I inquired after 3 years of tripos learning in the brain that how to use English words more cleverly. That is what I have learned. That analytical philosophy or linguistic philosophy, which is supposed to be the stock in trade in contemporary times, only teaches us to commit ourselves to speak without ambiguity, without overlap, without confusion. So it is one of the important functions of philosophy. Not only, now the old functions of philosophy of giving a well-tensioned, a world view, all those things might have been done, might be done, because sciences have taken over, and sciences say that what can we do? The world as it is can be best studied by us. What is mathematics? Mathematics is mathematics, geometry is geometry. And what philosophers can do, either to geometry or mathematics. If you want to read geometry, then read geometry. If you want to do geodesics, do geodesics. But then philosophers only try to clarify. But is clarification not? There have been critiques of philosophy. Can philosophy be only a clarification? Or can it also give you an insight? Well, I will go back to Socrates. He says that nobody wants unhappiness. Nobody wants to be good. The only thing is that he does not know himself. So, to know is to be good. This is a very, there is a lot of moral dilemmas about this. Duryodhana said that I know that is good, but I have no intention to be good. But he says, no, you do not know. If you know really good, if you know value, then you are value. So this is Socratic virtue. He says that if a person who does not do good is not knowing what to do. I think with this, I will beg your leave for having said things with absolutely disorderly manner, without any unity, and I thank you very much for listening to me. To all the